Okay, hello everybody. So I'm Dr. Brian Neal, and I am going to tell you a little bit about my experience of being awarded a Marie Curie co-fund grant from 2013 to 2015. But my first question here, if I can get to it, maybe what's happening here, Ali? Ah, there we go. So it said, how's your research agenda doing? I thought about three different ways to ask this question. The first question I said, what is your research agenda? And my wife said to me, that's a bit aggressive. And I was like, yeah, you're probably right. And then I said something about, then it was like, do you have a research agenda? And then she was like, no, that's a bit passive aggressive. And so finally I settled on how's your research agenda doing? So it assumes that there is one, that you have one, and that it is at some level of development or emergence. But I think this is a good question, and it's a good question I think to begin with when you're thinking about applying for some sort of research funding, because as I kind of shared earlier, this is a new question for me because for a lot of my academic life, I spent just simply trying to survive whatever thing was happening to me at that particular moment. So whether it was completing a master's degree and getting through the coursework, or whether it was trying to finish a PhD dissertation, which of course had a strong research component. That's what I was there to do. But I was also just really very worried about finding a job and eating enough food and sleeping and all of those things. And so I wasn't really thinking about life necessarily after my PhD. And so I can say with some sincerity that it wasn't until I actually was awarded a fellowship, a postdoctoral fellowship, that I actually began to actively think about my research agenda as something that was going to exist for a long time that I could make some choices about. So I started my doctoral research at the University of Glasgow in the Center for Literature, Theology, and the Arts. And so my research foci were very interdisciplinary at that point. So I was studying literary theory very broadly, the work of René Girard and his theory of sacrifice, tragic literature, very broad, biblical studies, very broad, theologies of sacrifice, a little bit more narrow. But within this kind of field of sort of research, there were some social and political implications to my research, but I wasn't really exploring them. I was just talking about, literary representation, questions of, interpretations of sacrifice and how that might have fit with different theological understandings of sacrifice within Christianity in particular. But I wasn't exploring some of the larger contextual aspects of my work. And that became a real shortcoming because at a certain point, I completely lost the plot and I had no idea why I was doing what I was doing. I just knew I needed to write some chapters in a book and talk to some very important people about it at a certain point to see if I could get a PhD. So I didn't have a research agenda. I was just surviving, essentially. And I don't think that that's uncommon for a PhD experience. In some ways, that's kind of what it is. Of course, you want to produce some piece of knowledge, but most of us get to the point that you really just want to be free of that piece of knowledge and to maybe move on to something else. So I finished my PhD in 2012. And I had a little bit of time teaching writing at the Glasgow School of Art where I began to enjoy knowledge again because art school students are great for helping you to just enjoy life in general. But I also needed to get back out to the world. And so that's when in 2013, in 2012, I applied for the AFR Marie Curie co-fund grant at the University of Luxembourg. And then I was applying to do research in a research unit in law and legal philosophy, which again is a new field, a completely new discipline. And I didn't even honestly know that legal philosophy existed exactly before meeting the supervisor who had worked with me. But my research foci changed somewhat. I added some things, but then some things stayed the same. So I was still talking about René Girard, but now I was adding in this kind of political, philosophical dimension, talking about neoliberalism, legal anthropology. Yep, that's a thing. Politics of austerity, because of course we were dealing with the direct effects in Europe, in particular with the sovereign debt crisis, and constitutional theory, which was also a new area for me. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of really emphasize when you're thinking about applying for some sort of Marie Curie fellowship and this has been suggested before, is that interdisciplinarity is a real asset in any project, being able to cross disciplines. And in some ways, the way that the calls are structured is that they kind of really almost require it. It's built into the language of the criteria for the fellowships that you have an interdisciplinary component. And that interdisciplinarity will be demonstrated both in the way that you approach your research questions. So you will be drawing on interdisciplinary methodologies, maybe new methodologies, but it'll also be demonstrated in the way in which you might sort of have your research hosted. So I never thought that I would be doing work in a faculty of law. And probably, with the exception of this type of research funding, I wouldn't get that opportunity. But this is the kind of unique opportunities that are available to us with the various sort of Marie Curie fellowship opportunities that you have a chance to do things that are unique and original. And that unique and original aspect of your research is actually what is essential to a successful project. So in some senses, it's kind of a dream for academic sort of transients like me. I don't know if transient's really the best term. Academic, people who are happy to cross sort of disciplines. Is that you actually get an opportunity to do projects that otherwise would be considered very unorthodox, maybe within a given sort of field or very sort of narrow discipline. So when you kind of look at my sort of how I ended up there are some things that I carried with me from my PhD experience that enabled me to get to this new opportunity. So while at the University of Glasgow in 2010, a professor of law there, Johan Vanderwall, my supervisor, David Jasper, and visual artist, Liebenen, a Finnish artist, they were awarded a Liverhume Trust grant to do this project, the Sacrificial Contours of Law, Liturgy, and Landscape. Don't ask me exactly what that means exactly, but we did it. We talked about it. We wrote some papers. But of course, you can see here that here Johan Vanderwall was instrumental to receiving that grant. And then it turns out that here he becomes my scientific contact or supervisor at the University of Luxembourg to do my project, which was Models of Sacrifice and Uncertainty, the Sacrificial Logic of Modern Socioeconomic Theory. And so one of the things that's really important when applying for grant is having a very I think, sort of strong connection to your host institution and also the scientific contact there or the supervisor. And so being able to make those contacts is sometimes, I think, I would say a complex process, that it can come sort of organically in the way that it did for me, and that I happened to meet my colleague Johan while at Glasgow, and then he sort of followed on to a different institution. And we kept in touch and we continued our work. But you can see that here the research agenda that was kind of nascent in my time in Glasgow was still kind of extending. And that research agenda not only includes the thoughts and ideas that I'm trying to produce, but also includes the people and the networks and the colleagues that you develop along the way. So developing those connections is really important, and having a firm connection at your host institution and specifically with your supervisor is really essential, because whenever it comes time for evaluators to look at your application, they're going to begin to look at that relationship and see whether or not it is a viable one, whether it's one that will produce the kinds of outcomes and results that merit you getting some money, a fairly substantial amount of money to do research, and being able to kind of to demonstrate that and evince that through your proposal is really important. So as you're thinking now about possibilities for applying for grants, you want to begin thinking about what existing organic relationships do you have with European research institutions and specific colleagues and scholars that you might be able to approach with a project that you feel there's going to be some kind of maybe natural complementarity between. So in thinking about developing your research agenda, I kind of separated these two things. So you can read this as one single bullet point list, or you can read them as two separate trajectories, okay? And you'll see why in a minute. So so on the one hand, on the left, this is ingraining yourself and sort of embedding yourself within the specificity of a discipline. So not everybody is by nature inclined towards interdisciplinarity. I was because of the nature of my PhD research, but some of us come from more specific disciplinary backgrounds, and that's fine. You need people who are deep as well as broad. And in that case, when you apply for a fellowship, there will still be interdisciplinary aspects, but that interdisciplinary work can still lead you towards a sort of deeper, more embedded position within a specific discipline. So I said that you might find that your research agenda develops in the way that you begin to solidify your position within that specific discipline. You develop an international network among people working within that field, okay, and that you establish a publishing presence within that given field. On the other hand, okay, you might either separately or in addition to this, expand your knowledge across disciplines. So for me, that was very much the case where I began to become more acquainted with a different kind of discourse within legal philosophy, constitutional law, but also political philosophy and political science. And in that case, you begin to develop an international and multidisciplinary network. And then you'll begin to obtain opportunities to collaborate and publish in a broader field. So these things are not necessarily separate, but I will say that there are risks involved in interdisciplinarity. And those risks are often demonstrated whenever it comes time to apply for another job. And people look at your CV and they say, so what do you do? It's a problem, right? It's a problem. And it's something that you have to sort of be able to answer and think about as you go along. For me, personally, I sort of decided to take a risk, and it was actually, remember, one of my evaluators' comments on my application when I read their comments. I don't know who they were precisely, but their comment said something like, this is a big risk that you're taking, jumping into a different field entirely, but it might work out. I was like, okay, that sounds good. Okay, I'll take that. It was more like a word of caution. Like it might turn out that you get entirely lost. For me, I think it has worked out, and I can explain why a little bit. You know, I forgot something here. Why was there a picture of a baby up there? I probably should mention that. So I didn't take a lot of pictures of myself in Luxembourg, but my wife and I did have this person while we were in Luxembourg. So that was another one of the. I wouldn't say that's exactly a research outcome, although it has involved a lot of research. On both sides. Yeah, so and Luxembourg was a good place for a baby to be born for a lot of different reasons. So I can say that was another kind of what we might consider like a surprising but important factor, which is how hospitable is the place that you're going to, say, life in general. On the other hand, everything was insanely expensive in Luxembourg. So that was one thing, but having a baby was not. So it all kind of evened out in the end. In fact, they kind of paid us money to have a kid, to be perfectly honest, which is pretty great. So what does it take to actually sort of to generate a successful Marie Curie project? I'd say that one, it should emerge from your unique academic expertise. So when you're putting together your proposal, you really want to tailor that proposal to highlight what is it that is unique about you. What do you bring to the table that maybe no one else can precisely bring? Is it a specific set of skills, disciplinary background, insight, or question that is unique? You got to have a compelling question that fills an existing gap in the research, like any good research project. Again, disciplinary, methodological, or philosophical complementarity with your prospective supervisor. So they begin to look for the match there and see that there is a good match between all of those things. And then finally, an innovative approach to constructing and sharing knowledge. Now, this is a challenge in humanities and social sciences. I'll speak specifically for humanities, where again, the primary thing that we produce are words. We speak words in rooms like this with people, and we listen to other people's words, and then we write things, more words, we publish those words. Okay. So thinking about how to develop your research output could include events. It could also include developing new networking opportunities between different research centers. Okay. So I'm gonna skip along here to the last bit. So when you're choosing a host, you want to think, is it going to be a hospitable place for you to actually do your work? And that includes the larger research environment. And is it going to be beneficial for you and the host institution? So what value do you bring to that host institution? And then you want to think about your supervisor. What kind of supervisor are they going to be? Are they going to give you the freedom to develop your thoughts and ideas? Are they going to put you to work for them in an assistant role possible? And you want to think about all those things because it's going to be important for really maximizing your the time that you have available in that role. And so finally, I just want to talk a little bit about the outcomes. So for me, again, the outcomes were publications. We did produce publications. So this actually has taken a long time to see the light of day. But here's an edited collection that kind of summarizes much of the research that we did during that time. And other sort of publications. You get an extended academic network. And that, to me, is one of the things that's most beneficial because then this is the thing that ends up producing more sort of benefits and opportunities for you in the future. So in this volume here, it's a very international collection of works from scholars from the United States and from Europe, from the UK. And so that extended academic network provides opportunities for further publication, further research, and collaboration. And then another of the outcomes, of course, is that you get continued research support. So, so I have successfully been awarded a travel grant to go to the Colloquium on Violence and Religion in Austria in July. And so even after the end of my fellowship, I still have access to the Marie Curie Alumni Association to travel funds. And guess what? My university or my college is not paying for me to go to Austria. And they wouldn't pay for me to go to Austria. So the only way I'm getting to Austria is through Marie Curie. And I'm not paying for it for myself either because, let's be honest, I didn't have a trip to Austria budgeted this summer. But now I'm going to get to go. And so, so the ongoing professional and research support that you get from being part of Marie Curie is, to me, one of the most transformative aspects of being awarded the fellowship. And it's, to me, one of the most, I would say, kind of radically innovative things about Marie Curie is that you have access to a network. And let's be honest, in the current sort of academic employment environment, we have starts and stops, peaks and valleys. So it's nice to feel that you're still connected to something even in the midst of those things. And so I'm encouraged that the Marie Curie is continuing to try to pursue that. So the last thing I'll end on is this recent joint declaration on sustainable researcher. And I'm not going to read this whole thing. I would just refer you to this because this is a really important statement that kind of points the way forward to how the research culture in Europe, but also globally, can begin to provide more sustainability, but also more stability for those of us who are still trying to figure out how to develop our research agenda in a world of uncertainty. Yeah, that's right. I just referenced my own Marie Curie postdoc.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, any questions that you might have at this stage? Because I think we should be interactive.
I have anybody else?
Yeah.
But I immediately was thinking about language skills and whether there was a way with the language, if you were studying languages for your life.
Okay, so the answer is no, I did not speak French at all, and that's my fault, of course. But the University of Luxembourg did provide me with free language courses while I was there, which I took advantage of. So my really terrible French got slightly less terrible. But also, I was really fortunate. I mean, Luxembourg is just a multilingual country. And so oftentimes you have different sort of, people from various parts of the European Union, and they are not speaking the same language, effectively. And so fortunately for me, English becomes the kind of the default language, right? So the only time I had difficulty necessarily was, like, say, for instance, whenever I was trying to get someone from the Luxembourg City Council to come, pick up an old sort of like bed frame. And the gentleman insisted that I speak French to him. It's still to this day my greatest accomplishment to speak French, which I said that you need to pick up this bed frame, and I did it in French. He helped me accomplish that. But no, so the language is not an issue. And that's the question in terms of thinking about how hospitable your host institution is going to be. I was fortunate that at Luxembourg, by nature of the institution, that it was a multilingual environment where English was really the default. That's saying that I didn't have access to everything. Right, there were still some things that were going to be exclusively in German, exclusively in French, and occasionally Luxembourgish, which is a language. But it's a good question.
Okay. So the question was, for those who are with us online, the question was, did you have to learn a new language when you moved to another country, basically? So yeah, in Europe, you don't really do that. Marie Curie is basically all in English, so it's fine.
That's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
They will want you to learn their language, but then they will also help you with all this.
Yep.